Okay. If anybody would like to speak during public input time to the Committee of the Whole, be sure to fill out one of these cards, please, and give it to the city clerk so that we can include you in the call for public input. Okay, so we're going to start the Committee of the Whole meeting. This is September 24th, 2018. I'd like the clerk to please call the roll.
City Council members Ammons.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Hazen.
Here.
Jacobson. Here. Miller.
Here.
Roberts.
Yes, here.
Wu.
Here.
Mayor Marlin.
Here.
Okay, next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of our previous meeting, September 10th.
I'll move approval of those minutes.
I'll second approval.
Okay.
Looks like Bill's got one
Yeah, we got a
correction.
question on it. Okay, so Jared is made the motion, and Jared Miller and Dean Hazen made the second.
Yes, sir.
And, okay, are there corrections or comments? Yes, Bill Brown.
Yeah, I have a couple corrections. On the top of the second page, the third bullet point down said that the reserve bid for the Landmark Hotel was $600,000. That was actually the minimum bid, not the reserve.
Okay,
So if we could change reserve to minimum bid. And then on page 3, the second paragraph, the motions on forwarding the ordinance for the development to the committee was made with no recommendation, and it was seconded, and then there was amendment made to the motion, but it doesn't ever say that we voted on the amendment. It says we voted on the amended motion, but not the amendment. So there was just a vote missing in there, that we first voted on the amendment, and that passed, but carried by voice vote. Does that make sense, Charlie?
Got it.
okay, thank you, Bill. Is there anybody else? Yes, Mary Alice.
I believe in that same motion that it was Alderman Jared who made that motion, the original one, to
That's
forward the ordinance to council with no recommendations. I would second that, and then I think Aaron made the amendment. Is that correct?
Yes. We'll review the video.
Okay.
Okay, we got some names to the motions. That's tidy. Okay, with those corrections, are those appropriate, Jared and Dean? Accept those?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay, I don't see anybody coming forward. It's now time for public input. I have just received only one public input card from the public. Susan Kozwalski, you'd like to talk about a topic of interest to you. Would you like to come forward, please? Yeah, just sit there near the mic and let us know what you wanted to indicate. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening to me tonight. My name is Sue Kozlowski, and I'm talking about school safety and school safety for everyone. My family moved to this area 13 years ago from Wisconsin. 11 years ago, we chose to move into Urbana because we liked the neighborhood schools. We absolutely loved what we researched and found out about the Urbana School District. My grandchildren are now 15 and 17. They've been through Leal School, the middle school, and going through the high school currently. My daughter and I both teach early childhood education. We understand that with children, They need to know expectations. They need to know if they don't meet those expectations, what the consequences are. This is taught early on, and it's the same whether the child is 3 or 10 or 17. They need to know there is a reaction for their action, always. This is not happening in our schools right now, and it frightens me. It frightens a lot of our friends that we talk with. I know it frightens the teachers, and it's really sad. I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up in the 60s. We kind of know what the 60s were like. They weren't good, and in Chicago, they really weren't good. But we knew who we had to kind of stay clear of. And even though I was around a lot of gangs, they didn't mess with you if you didn't mess with them. In our schools right now, my granddaughter comes home and says she doesn't know who she's safe with or around and who she isn't. She also doesn't know who she can talk to about it. She doesn't feel anyone will listen. That is a very sad thing. These teenagers are going through all sorts of turmoil, you know, in their heads and that, trying to be independent and yet still being a little childlike, and they can't feel safe in their school. This should never be an issue, never. We came to this community so we wouldn't have to face this issue. To be in a school where you're heard, there is daily 4 to 5 fights in just the high school. That's not counting what's going on in the middle school right now. Teachers are being sent to the ER. My son-in-law is a police commander. He knows he has to put his life on the line every day, and he chose to do that. Teachers choose to teach, not to put their life on the line. We have some very excellent teachers here in our school district through all the schools. We've personally encountered them. My grandson has dealt with very severe bouts of depression, and through all the grades he has had many, many teachers really work side by side with him to let him excel, to understand him in that. These are the teachers we will lose. They will not stay where they are not safe and they are not heard, and I don't blame them. But we lose them. We lose a lot in the city, in our community. It's not just the school we're talking about. It's not just the kids who are going to suffer. We are all going to suffer. It will just keep going down. We lose good teachers. We lose a good draw to our community. We are losing families. I know of 4 families right now who are planning to move. They're putting their houses up for sale because they want to put their kids in a good, safe environment.
You have 30 seconds, Ms. Kozlowski.
Okay, thank you. We're losing revenue that way. What happens to our community when we lose too much revenue? I don't want to see this community or the school district die, but I certainly want to see it safe. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Yes, Dean.
Yes.
Sorry to hold you up there.
Oh.
I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, my wife and I spoke at the board meeting on Sunday afternoon. My question for you is, number 1, what do you think has caused this deterioration? And number 2, do you have any specific suggestions to fix it?
I think a big thing right now is the new discipline they put into play. I think children need to learn how to work things out together, talk things through. It's an important thing to learn. through life. We need to do that as adults. But they also need to know they still have consequences, because anybody can say anything and walk out the door and do something totally opposite. So we need to expand on the discipline. We need to bring back the suspension. If, and I honestly don't believe in the suspend the child and necessarily send them home to an empty house because the parents are working so they can play all day on their Xbox. That's not a lesson either. I don't have answers. Maybe suspend them and they have to spend the day cleaning up a mess that kids caused or they caused or something. But we need to make them accountable. We need to let them know very clearly every day, you do this, this is going to happen. There is zero tolerance. There is no explanations, no nothing. There is just zero tolerance.
So what I'm hearing is, in your opinion, that this deterioration started when they implemented this new system?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. If you have any suggestions, please feel free to get a hold of me. I'm trying to keep communications open with the school board. I find myself getting very upset, and then I don't make suggestions. I'm just complaining. So that's why I'm honestly asking people to give me suggestions to take to them.
Okay.
So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. Does anybody else want to speak during the public input session? Please put your card over at the city clerk's office desk. The desk. All right. Okay, Eldris Melinda Carr continues to have concerns about the Dr. Ellis sewer issues, the equity and the historic import of them, but does not wish to come forward and actually speak. Okay, is that all then? Okay, Charlie says he's going to find out one more. Meanwhile, I might as well mention this. The YMCA in Champaign is kicking off launching a program called Transforming Lives and Connecting Communities. The kickoff celebration will be September 25th at Riggs Brewery at 1901 High Cross Road in Urbana. And they're looking to improve and connect with lives in the community. So that was on our desk. Okay. All right. So there being no other people coming forward for public input at this time, we'll move on to presentations. And we have one from our police department. Chief Searles and Seraphin, sorry. Thank you. And Lieutenant Sanders, thanks. No, they don't. Okay, and this is about body cameras.
All right, good evening. In 1994, when I started with the police department, we were inserting VHS tapes into VCRs in the trunks of the squad cars. And since that time, we've made a lot of headway, specifically with regards to our car systems and other options that are available. So tonight we wanted to make a presentation regarding our next step moving forward as we, I guess, take a three-pronged approach to our video systems. There are currently the in-car police cars, the squad cars, as we refer to them. Their systems are due to be replaced. They have actually been due to be replaced, but we held off so we could sync that process up with the replacement of the actual cars, which is occurring later this fall. In addition, we will be moving forward on replacing the system within our interview rooms, our 2 interview rooms within the Detective Bureau. And as we went down that road and looked at replacing those 2, we realized that indeed now might be the time to strike out towards body cameras. And so that's what we are proposing and what we'd like to show you tonight. Essentially, a couple of years ago when I was in the patrol division, we began reviewing body cameras. Lieutenant Sanders and I went to a trade show and went to table after table after table learning about them, and began to do a little back of the envelope math and realized indeed we perhaps were closer than we thought with regards to that initial capital outlay. Specifically with regard to the squad cars, the money that was set aside in the VERF, in addition to money set aside within the Criminal Investigations Division for the interview rooms, we were 75% of the way to our goal. So, we're now willing to move forward. I will at least let you know that as of right now, we're not asking for any new monies. The issue, I believe, before you technically is a budget amendment, as we need to move some funding around. In addition, we have examined our staffing with regards to this issue, and we believe, at least for the time being, we want to attempt to do this with our current staffing model. That doesn't mean at some point in the future we might have to come back and say we would like to try something slightly different. But we think right now that the time is right. We would be one of the later adopters of this technology in Champaign County, but we think that we've identified the funding sources that we need, and tonight we'd like to go over that with you. Having said that, I will now turn this over to Lieutenant Sanders, who has a little more of the technical side of the presentation.
Thank you, Bryant. So, before we get deep into this, a couple definitions to go through, so as we talk, we don't get confused. The interview room cameras, we won't discuss much past this slide. They are 4 cameras, 2 in each room, that are going to get installed into the investigations interview rooms. Currently, they do have cameras in them. They're just a step above the VHS tape, where they are discs that they put into a DVR and record, and so this will greatly enhance their ability to record within those interview rooms. The 4RE, when you see that in the slide presentation or anywhere, excuse me, that's referring to the in-car video system, the ICV, and the Vista is the body-worn camera, or BWC. We're looking at WatchGuard as the vendor, and that's the names they've picked for their products. It can get really confusing as we move forward when we talk the difference between on and activated, so we wanted to flesh that out right now. The Vista, which there's a couple of them floating around if you haven't seen them up there, it is always on. There's a 30-second pre-record, so when an officer actually activates it, it will go back 30 seconds and grab the 30 seconds before the activation. So when you read in policy and you read in the law where it says on, that simply means that that item is powered up. It is recording, but it's not creating a file. Activated means that the Vista is actually creating a file, which can be then reviewed later, and the event file is what that is actually being created. So why now? Bryant hit on a little bit of this. We've got a new fleet coming. Every 4 years we switch tire squad cars over, and those are due to be delivered here the end of the month or early next month in November. And so this is the best time if we're going to do something, is to get them in now. Our current system, which is referred to as Arbitrator, is 7 years old on a 5-year VERF. It's ready. These are ready to be gone. We just started having some significant problems with them, so it's time to replace them. The bundled systems are much more cost effective. Buying everything as the body camera and the in-car vehicle camera at the same time, we're saving a significant amount of money. As I referred earlier, we're going to install these in new cars. So if we were to buy the cars now, put the old system in, and replace it later, we're looking at about a $9,000 to $10,000 cost difference to pay somebody to pull out a system and put a new system in. So we're going to save some money doing it right now. Also, Investigations was already planning on updating their interview room systems, so this was an opportune time to, the last bullet point there, to bring everything together and put all of our digital platform onto one system. Financial considerations. Excuse me. The VERF for the in-car vehicle or in-car video was $159.06. CID had a VERF of $15,000 roughly for what they needed. We looked and found equipment, other equipment VERFs that we could use that funding, and the reason we're here tonight is the budget amendment of $31,000. That brings us total cost up to $219,130 to purchase the 3 camera systems. Why are we doing body worns? The portable audio video recorders, which is our policy title for it, or the body worn cameras, are an effective tool that we can use for multiple different scenarios. One, and one of the primary, is evidence. These items collect evidence. They add more evidence to a case and to an investigation. Transparency. What's happening in front of the officer is being captured and can be shared in court, can be shared in review, and we'll talk a little bit later about the FOIA end of it. Accountability. It holds both the officer and the citizens accountable. Police community relations. 2014, after the unfortunate incident in Ferguson, the communities throughout the nation started asking departments to start wearing body-worn cameras. And we're at a position now we feel like we can start doing that. And finally, resolve complaints. The example I've used as I've talked to a few of you is, after I got promoted, one of the most frustrating things I had was to investigate a complaint that a citizen filed and come up with an unfounded resolution. Meaning, I'm not saying the citizen wasn't right, I'm not saying my officer wasn't right. And when we go with unfounded, the citizen feels like we didn't listen to them, and they feel like that we're just covering up our officers. And when I go to my officer and say this was unfounded, the officer feels like I didn't believe him, and just it's a bad way all the way around. This is a tool that's going to help to bring those unfounded complaints into more clarity. The body-worn camera guidelines are set in policy and by state law. And the state laws varies. We'll get into that, a little bit of that here in a second. Is very particular on what we can and can't do. Moving forward, we need some realistic expectations. The first is that this is a new process and there's going to be a learning curve. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to look at processes that we've put into play and decide those processes need to be changed. We're going to listen to the community and enhance how we're doing things. So there's going to be a learning curve. We need everybody to remember these are battery operated and electronic. So while we feel like we're buying the best piece of equipment that we can afford, it's still run by 2 iPhone batteries. And so it can fail. And so we just need individuals to understand that we don't expect them to fail. We expect them to perform flawlessly, but they are electronic. And just like your computer and just like your phone and just like any other electronics, they can fail. More importantly, the squad car camera data that is collected, it provides a specific view of a larger event. And it doesn't show you exactly what's going on everywhere around you or around the officer that's taking the video. While this system has a top-of-the-line audio system on it and is very clear, there are ambient noises and background noises that can very easily interfere with the product that is produced. If the semi is going by, it may reduce it a little bit, but there are other things that could happen. Most importantly, this is part of a complete investigation as we look at these. It's the view that that camera had of that incident. We still have to interview the officer, we still have to interview the witnesses, we still have to interview the individuals caught on the video. It doesn't tell us everything that happened. I'll steal Bryant's favorite example of this is when you watch a sports event. I love baseball, and they can replay the first base play over and over and over, and you're still not really sure if the guy was safe or out. And they've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of cameras, HD at the best level, and watching it over and over and over, it still can be just a guess or an opinion on exactly what happened. So we need to keep that in mind as we put these forward. We're going to install 13 4REs. We have 13 squad cars. Each one will get its own 4RE. The department's going to issue every police officer in the department a body camera, from the chief on down. Everybody's going to have their own body camera. We have found over the years that if we try to share equipment, it becomes shared equipment, and it's not taken care of as well. When it breaks, we know who broke it. When it's working, we know who's using it. The officer will wear the Vista in a forward-facing manner. As you look at the ones that are going around, you'll see they have a clip on there. That clip can come off. There's multiple different clips that the vendor sells, and the officer can configure it on the facing forward on the chest or on the shoulder, how the officer chooses to do that. The Vista can hold up to 12 hours of HD video before it is full. Typically, once the officer plugs it into either a charging station in the squad car or at the police department, it will then start to download that so it can refill with more data. The body-worn does film continuously in HD, where the 4RE can be configured so that some of the videos can be saved in standard def and some of them can be saved in HD, just depending upon the severity of what the incident was. That will help us as we start to save and store all this data that we're going to start collecting. The battery is designed to last up to 19 hours on standby and 7 continuous hours if activated, meaning it's capturing and recording and filing data. Having been a police officer for close to 28 years, I can't think of a time I was ever on a scene doing police work for 7 straight hours. So we're fairly confident, or very confident, that the battery life on these is going to be what we need it to be. Creating and reviewing the data files. The 4RE files and the Vista will sync together. So when the officer walks out of the squad car on a traffic stop, the only thing the officer is going to be wearing is the Vista camera. And when they sync it up eventually back into the 4RE, the sound will then be synced magically in the computer world to the other files captured within that video. So everything will be running synced together. We are going to store all the data on a server here at the police department. Part of the cost is purchasing that server. That was much more cost effective than trying to do cloud storage. We looked at one system that would basically give us the camera for free. Every 5 years they were going to update it, and we only had to give them for the cloud storage $100,000 a year. We thanked them for their time, and they went back to Indianapolis. The retention is mandated by statute. So anything that is not flagged, and the 7 things that can create a file to be flagged are listed there. But if it's not flagged by law, it has to roll off of our system in 90 days. We cannot retain it unless it has been flagged. If it has been flagged, we have to retain it for a minimum of 2 years. FOIA, this was one of the bigger questions we had. The statute states specifically that recordings made with the use of the officer-worn body camera are not subject to disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. And then like Illinois does, that we've always got an exception to that. The first is if the requester is a subject of the encounter. If this body camera captured you, you're a subject in that video, you can get that video through the FOIA process. In the event that it has been flagged, as not, where I showed you 7 flags a while ago, the state breaks this down for FOIA purposes to these 4. If there's a filed citizen complaint, if an officer has discharged a firearm, if there's been the use of force, arrest, or detention, and if there's been bodily harm or death. Those are subject to FOIA. However, if the video captures a witness or a victim in that file, then we have to get written consent from that witness and or victim, or multiple if there are. We have to get written consent before we can release the video under a FOIA. Once it's met that criteria listed there, then it goes into the regular FOIA process. So that's when the FOIA team will start looking at it as, is this something that is eligible to be released? The Illinois Body-Worn Camera Act, which is what we look at quite a bit, requires officers, and as we've read the law, well, we didn't update this quite yet, but it's wearing a uniform or taking official action. So whether they're in uniform or not, if they have the camera, it needs to be worn on them all time while on duty if they're in uniform, and they have to activate it when performing any law enforcement activity. And we'll get into in a minute what exactly the law enforcement activity is. Exceptions to the mandatory on position would be when there's something preventing an officer from automatically turning it on or activating it. The law then reads that it has to be turned on or activated as soon as possible afterward, after whatever the event was that prevented the officer from turning it on. When a victim or witness requests deactivation, the officer can shut the power off. The slide is a little misleading when it says it's allowed but not mandatory. The officer has if the officer doesn't believe that the individual is going to become a suspect in whatever the investigation is, then the officer needs to shut it off. If the officer believes that the individual they're talking to may become a suspect in whatever they're doing, then they can leave it on. That's going to be circumstantial depending upon what's going on with that call. And anytime an officer is dealing with a confidential source, they can power the VISTA off. We want to protect our sources, and we want people to feel, when they're giving this information, comfortable doing so. One of the biggest questions we get is, do you have to tell people they're being recorded? If the person is in a position where they have reasonable expectation of privacy, they're in their own homes, something of that effect, the officer must tell them that they are being recorded. The proof of that notice must be given in the recording, and again, there may be some circumstance where that can't happen, but as soon as that circumstance preventing the notification is over, the officer has to tell them, the individuals, they're being recorded. The officers may use their own discretion to notify suspects and witnesses and victims out in public areas. So the officer can, but does not have to. It's not on the slide, but this is the officers in a traffic stop per the law do not have to tell them that they're being recorded. So what is a law enforcement related encounter or activity? This comes out of the law. Traffic stop, I won't read them, they're in front of you, but that's a list of what is a encounter, law enforcement encounter. Pretty much a lot of what we do A lot of what our officers do is going to be law enforcement related. When the VISTA activation is not required would be special events, situations such as the Sweet Corn Festival, Cop on Top, when we're standing on top of Dunkin' Donuts, something to that effect. We don't have to have, the officer's still going to be wearing it if they're in uniform, but it's not going to be on, it's not going to be activated. The law does state, and our policy does state, that the officer is responsible for making sure this equipment works. And so the officer will check it before they go out and make sure it's synchronizing correctly with the squad car system. We have not, we've begun discussing, we've not settled on what our review policy will be, but there will, supervisors are permitted to review videos to ensure that the officers are complying with the directive, to be able to identify any training needs that may be exposed through reviewing the video, and quite frankly, to recognize when officers are doing a great job. We've got wonderful officers. We've got some of the best police officers in the county. They do a great job, and we don't always know it because they're not being captured on video. And now our supervisors are going to be able to see more often when they're doing that stellar job. Supervisors will be directed to save any videos associated with any formal or informal complaint. Those are things that will get flagged then. If Mrs. McGillicuddy comes in and files a complaint, that video then gets flagged. And then we've got it for a minimum of 2 years. Recordings cannot be used as discipline on the law enforcement officer unless, and then this is again straight out of the law. This isn't our policy, it's the law. It lists several situations where discipline can occur. What the law intent is to keep command from going on a fishing. We can't go fishing for a problem. We can't go looking at an officer who's got their shirt untucked or not wearing the hat right or something like that and go looking for a problem. But if they're doing a significant problem, the law does give us the ability to take appropriate action with that. So in conclusion, the deployment of the body-worn cameras is going to be a leap forward for the Urbana Police Department. I'll go back to it's going to be a learning curve, but it's going to be something that is unlike anything we've done before. We're going to be the last of the large 5 police departments in Champaign County to get body-worn cameras. All the other departments have them. The system we're purchasing is the same one U of I just deployed about a month or so ago. The department, we've engaged in extensive research. I got promoted to lieutenant about 4 years ago, and it was one of the first things I started looking at when I came upstairs. So we've looked at them quite a bit. We feel like WatchGuard is going to be the best product we can get for the money. And finally, during this process, we've had really no voiced pushback from our officers. The officers are looking forward to this transparency and looking forward to this accountability. They're not afraid of the technology. Pretty much everybody working right now has come up with cameras in the squad cars, and this is just an extension of that, and they're excited to have it. So we will open it up for questions now.
Okay, so thank you for the presentation. Does council have questions? Yes, Aaron.
All right, so gentlemen, thank you for the presentation, and I really appreciate the latter part of the presentation that points to the officers voicing their support for the body-worn cameras. It's for us being the last team to the dance, so to speak, is not something that I'm typically happy to hear about in the city of Urbana. We want to pioneer progressive policies and things like that from the city of Urbana. But it's nice to see that they are on board, and I think it's a huge step forward for accountability, transparency, all of those reasons. So I'm very happy to hear that they are on board with it, and I'm happy to do anything that we can in the community from a police and community relationship standpoint to educate further the constituents, my constituents in particular, about this, the body-worn cameras and how that may come about. I do have a couple of questions that I want to ask. So I think you spoke to a little bit about the exigent circumstances, right? As a union person, I understand that there are going to be certain things that we have to, or that the officers are going to be asking for. Is this conversation, or is this policy that we're putting forth, was there a conversation, is this a implementation of the policy, or is this an agreement with the FOP?
It's an implementation of the policy, but I will tell you that we've met with the union officially in labor management meetings. When we began the testing and evaluating back in June, I think we started this, we pushed out, we got the policy out, we put the law out, it was emailed, it was set out on the briefing table, we had discussions, we talked about it at briefings, and so yes, this is something that the FOP has been a part of this discussion.
Okay, good. So if you can just expound a little bit on who determines or what determines an exigent situation or circumstance.
I think that circumstance rises in front of you. So the extreme would be is the officer is inside a convenience store and something happens right in front of them, an act of violence happens right in front of them, and they have to react to that. And I want the officer to take care of the civilian, not worry about pushing a button.
And I'll jump in here just for a second as well, because one of the things that we liked about this particular system is the integration. So there are triggers when officers are driving to an event and they turn on the overhead emergency lights. Not only will the camera kick on for the car, which is a two-piece forward-facing camera plus a back seat camera, in addition, the body camera will also kick on. And so that takes some of that. We're going to a man with a gun call or whatever they're going to. Once they hit that lights on, the body camera comes on. And that, I think, was really a big feature for us. One of the things is, as I managed patrol officers and you're trying to handle all this gear, one of the things that I liked about this particular vendor is that they were one that would allow us to have one piece of equipment that you see there that the officers had to wear. So they don't have to, if we went with our current vendor, they offer a body camera and an in-car camera solution, but there's a body camera and then they also have to wear a microphone. And there's enough stuff already, and there's enough stuff to manage and enough batteries to try to replace. And so we were really pleased with the fact that this system would be able to sort of, by magic or maybe some kind of software technology, mesh the two video files together after they get would get downloaded. So
That's extremely helpful, and that's the kind of stuff I think that the public would appreciate understanding more as well. And so I know we can paint lots of different circumstances. I just want to say that I think that the concern that I've heard in talking to people about these type of circumstances is that when it's a heated situation, people will respond. But I'm wondering what level of training or how you've implemented the training so that in those heated situations, they understand the importance of hitting that button. Because the public and the council, I would assume, if we support this, is saying that, okay, we want this accountability, this transparency, so we don't want a volume of, you know, it was just the heat of the moment, I didn't get a chance to turn it on. So I'm just wondering what sort of, how you're going to implement that in there and for accountability of, like, that's what I mean by who determines what is an
and I think, Aaron,
circumstance.
one of the things that I point to in this is that the definition of law enforcement activity is very broad. So when the officers are getting out of their cars and walking up on a domestic, if they didn't need to turn on the lights to get there because they were just around the block, I would want them to hit that button as they're walking up and not wait to get to the front door.
Okay.
So I think that's sort of where Joel's example was with regards to, I'm in the 7-Eleven, I'm getting my evening cup of coffee, and something happens.
Is it still free donuts or just
You know,
free
I
coffee?
don't think so.
No.
I've been going to the wrong place. But as you're doing that, then we want to take care of the situation and then resolve it. And that speaks a little bit to the 30-second pre-record as well. That sometimes guys, whoa, as they're trying to adapt and do something, you hit that button, it's going to grab that
30 seconds prior.
that 30 seconds
Okay.
as well. And one other thing I think that deserves mentioning while we're on the same topic is that I don't know the exact distance between the two devices, meaning the car and the body cam. But if one is activated and one is not within range of the other, so if I'm maybe dealing with something and I turn it on and I'm too far away, as I get within a certain distance of the car, it will kick on
Okay.
as well. So I think I envision sort of as Joel and we've talked with some of you already, that some of the idea with regards to just being used to carrying something new.
Yeah.
That you sit down, you're typing a report, you pull it out, throw it in the docking station, and we'll have multiple, and all of a sudden they run out the door to go do something like they've done for the last 15 years. Oh, uh-oh. I envision a few of those events occurring in the beginning, and as we try to coach and work through this.
No, I think it's fair to understand that it's something new, and we have to be patient. There's going to be a learning curve in relationship to that. You all know that what I'm speaking to are those major situations that have the community in an uproar, and we just want to try to avoid as much of that stuff as possible. So that's what I'm speaking to in relationship to those circumstances. Can a assailant or alleged perpetrator request that the camera be turned off? I know you said that the victim or the witness can, as I read through the material, but I wasn't sure if the
No.
person. So
I mean, I guess they can request it, the officer, through
well,
the law.
I mean, I'm just asking because I didn't
Yeah,
understand
no,
the.
yeah, the law is very clear that the offender, suspect, whatever label, there's not a expectation of privacy for them at that point. That-
I mean, it's still, let's say, so for instance, if an individual, if you see the person, right, shooting at somebody or committing an act of violence, that's pretty plain. But if you get a call that, there's a alleged perpetrator, black male, 6 foot, wearing a suit and a beard from Tristus, well, I'm just kidding, who's walking down the street, I mean, does that person still have a reasonable assumption of privacy? They haven't been convicted of anything. They are an alleged person in a circumstance. Could that person request that you turn off the body-worn camera?
I want those cameras on. I think they can request that, but I think this is clearly where we want that on. One of the other examples will be a male and a couple fighting in the park, domestic at the park, and the officers are going to respond. They're both going to have, they're not sure who's occupying what role at that beginning moment. So they're going to go up there, I want those cameras on, and they can sort of sort through this. And there's the mandatory piece with regards to the announcing that you have this on. And that's one of those things that I think will sort of become part of the officer's lexicon. I don't foresee it being a giant sort of explanation, but hey, I'm Bryant, I'm with the Urbana Police. I do have a body camera on tonight. Can you tell me what's going on over here? I envision it being something that's conversational and we're not signing carbon forms or anything like that. So I think until they really, truly, I think people truly want us to have these on, and I think that's the expectation. TV shows are on. You see them now on people playing policemen on TV. And so, yeah, I think that we want them on.
So I just had one more, because you answered about the special event details. I won't get into that one. The recording's not used to discipline officers. And I understand fishing expeditions, again, my union ties, I understand that people who do things on the weekend, for instance, when there are companies that have drug policies, the unions always are concerned about the reach of those drug policies and things of that nature. So I understand fishing expeditions and being concerned about that. But if you, as a superintendent or a lieutenant and a chief, are reviewing the body cameras, as you may do on some sort of regular basis just to see what's going on, if you see something that only the trained eye will see. There's no complaint because the citizen doesn't know that it's a Urbana UPD policy that's being violated or that their rights are being violated. If you see something like that, you're saying that the state law says that you cannot address that? I'm not talking about a frivolous, shirt not untucked or, socks not matching. I'm talking about a legitimate violation.
So, and this is where, this was the language that we cut straight out of there, that if there was, we're doing this and we see someone manhandle someone, absolutely we could, because it would be the encounter and the recording could result in the formal investigation in the Uniform Peace Officers Disciplinary Act. So those are the things, when those things happen, that's when we would be able to take action.
Okay, all right. Thank you all very much. Again, I'm very happy that we're moving in this direction, and ecstatic to hear that the officers are on board as well. Thank you all very much for the due diligence and for sharing it. Appreciate it.
Okay, are there other council members wish to? Mary Alice Wu.
I
First.
have 3 questions. My first question is, so you said, and I don't think we have the slide on the cost. I think it was, what, 219, 215, something like that? All right, 219. So you said 75% of the cost is already covered with items that we were planning on replacing and the money that we had set aside for that replacement. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be the ICV VERF,
Right.
100.
For those of people who don't know what VERF is, it's just basically setting aside money to replace
Yes.
equipment over long term. Okay, all right. So my question is, trying to read through the budget amendment, I know that you had said, when we had talked, that some of the money was coming from forfeiture funds, some kind of random funds that we had sitting around, so to speak. I'm paraphrasing here. I'm looking for the page, so I'm stalling a little bit. I'm sorry. Here we go. I found the page. All right. Random funds are, let's see here, Police Special Fund, Narcotics Forfeit Fund, Police DUI. Those are my random funds here.
Yes.
So that equates to the 25% that's not covered in the 219,000. So roughly 60,000.
Close to that. So the budget amendment, I believe, is the Federal Narcotics Forfeited Fund, Police DUI. So these are DUI fines and things that we could think of no better purpose for than to use for car cameras. And then there's an equipment uniform amount as well that we're using. And then there's been a couple of other things where we have had some cost set-asides in the VERF that weren't as expensive as we thought they were going to be. And so there's a couple other items there that, the in-car police computers were less than we initially had set aside. So those bits are how we've sort of cobbled this together.
So if we cobble together from the variety of funds, at the end of the day, you're asking us for $31,000. That's what the budget amendment is. Or does that include the cobbling together of the funds?
That is, so it's, I don't know if I'm going to speak to this appropriately, whether I have Elizabeth come help me here with this.
Elizabeth Anna.
I'm going to try to answer this.
I don't think it's on.
So the cobbling together is reallocating $6,836 from general fund budget for uniforms and $16,668 from DUI funds and $7,749 from narcotics forfeitures funds. All of those items in the police special fund, the DUI money and the federal narcotics forfeitures are restricted to being used for specific purposes, and this fits within those restrictions.
Okay, so at the end of the day, you're not asking for us to give you an additional $31,000?
No,
I just
no.
want to be clear about
No,
where these numbers come from.
This is, the 31,000 is already budgeted in other places, but we
Right.
have to amend the budget to move it from those other funds into the vehicle and equipment replacement fund.
And then last but not least, there is an increase in the VERF of $6,000 reoccurring in perpetuity until we decide to do something besides body cameras. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. So thank you for that clarification. And I apologize, I didn't hear you talk a little bit about access to these data files. So you talked a bit about who can FOIA and who can see it and so forth, but what about access from the police department? If you could just expand upon the actual officer themselves, and then also if there could be potentially modifications of that file.
Sure. So the system that we're purchasing, or any system that a police department would purchase, has to maintain a chain of evidence. And so every time you log into it, if an officer pulls up a file to review, it's documenting in the metadata who logged into that, how long they watched it, and what they did with that information. An officer has no ability whatsoever to alter a video. As the person who researched this and is being part of this, I will have no access. Chief Seraphin will have no access to change or alter any of the videos. And if it were to be changed or altered, there would be a record of what was done. So the officers, if an officer logs into the video, will know that the officer logged into that video. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, so basically you said that the police department, if I could paraphrase, does not have access to the files in terms of who logged in and what time they logged in, but you could ask the IT department for that?
We'll have
That's what-
access to who logged in. I can look at who logged in, but
Okay.
I can't go in and erase part of the file or erase a file. I will not have access to do that.
And is there redundancy in the server so that you have backups? Is that going to be tape backups? Is that going to be server backups? How is it?
Currently, the backup will be within the server. There's, as I understand it, and you're getting into IT stuff here, is there's a triple redundancy within the server.
Okay, all right, and my last question has to do with property. So we talked about victims being able to request to see the video. Victims can also be property owners, correct? And so if there is something that occurs, say you're chasing somebody through and they jump and they fall over the fence and they break that, can the property owner then ask to see that video if there's property damage?
Well, I guess I would
Sorry,
scroll
dump you.
back to my FOIA slide here. Let's see. So you're saying the victim, then the
Yes.
homeowner, the unassociated homeowner who's not a subject of the encounter, because they weren't who we were
Correct.
chasing, and it would not. We'll keep it as a fairly minor incident, like you said. So then the event has been flagged, and none of these would apply, and so therefore then the last paragraph doesn't apply. So the answer would be no.
The answer is no. Okay, all right, thank you.
So, Eric, okay, sorry.
Sorry.
Didn't see you, Eric.
So ACLU suggested guidelines talk a lot about public release, which I don't think was a phrase that you used, but you talked about FOIA, which is kind of equivalent, I guess, in the sense that events that are subject to FOIA, the person who requests that, well, let me ask that. Let me transpose that into public release. That FOIA request could come from, for example, a media person,
Yes,
newspaper
correct,
or television, and so those and so that would so the circumstances that you list for FOIA are essentially the same as that's essentially equivalent to public release. Anything that's subject to FOIA could ultimately become public. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And one thing I want to make clear with regards to FOIA allows us to exempt certain things and protect certain bits of information. But the department could still, in a very highly emotional event, we could still go and release video that was pertinent to the situation without necessarily having a FOIA request.
Okay. Provided that you got permission from anybody who was subject to privacy rights.
We would
for that video, yeah.
address those concerns, yes.
I think that the full array of your policy really captures well, as far as I can see, the balance between your need to do effective police work and the rights of citizens, both due process rights and privacy rights. So I'm sure that there'll be glitches, but it looks, you know, because there always are, it's something complicated, but it really looks good.
And well, thank you. And that's one of the nice things about being a later adopter, is you get a chance. You get a chance to look at other policies, and we combed through other things, and we've read model stuff that came out, and we've looked at our neighbors' policies and things as we've tried to sort of get this thing put together.
Oh, I guess if this is a totally trivial technical point, but it flashed through my mind because of my own experiences with IT. You said everything's going to be on the server, and the server will be backed up on the cloud or on a second disk that is in our possession, but in a different physical remove, or what is that?
So for now, to get this mission launched, it will be redundant within the server box itself, recognizing that that's not necessarily the absolute best practice. But that gets down to some money concerns, and so that we're hoping as we budget and the next time that we'll be able to address that. And we've already had preliminary discussions with IT on a better model, hot and cold storage and other things that I've learned about. So that's definitely on the radar.
Okay, others? Okay, Bill.
Yeah, just some clarification on the ongoing costs. So the $6,000, that's figured on just replacement costs for 60 cameras over 5 years. So they're about $500 a camera. Is that?
Currently, the cameras, I believe now we're in the bundled package, we're $900 a piece, but I won't speak to that. I think that money came from the total cost.
Yeah, so I don't have all the math with me at the moment, but that was in addition to what's already budgeted for replacement for those items.
Okay, and the $150,000 that was budgeted for the in-vehicle or in-car cameras, that was for 14 cameras plus the server? Is that what the 150 was kind of geared toward?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay, so eventually, I mean, the server will wear out. Maybe this is a bigger server than we would have had otherwise, so it's hard to get a
Yes.
clear picture of what this is actually going to cost on an annual basis. And then, as you said, there might be additional personnel. So I think it'd be wrong for us to just think that we're going to get by with $6,000 a year and get body cameras.
Oh, I don't know that that's a side note to this, which maybe isn't quite the number answer. Certain things like the body cameras, I believe, at the end of their 5th year, we'll have to replace those. As Joel already spoke of, our squad cars, those systems actually we were able to get another 2 years out of. The detective interview rooms, I believe, will last even longer. They're not subject to wear and tear and falling and those types of things. So I believe that I'm hoping that we have this will be enough money to move this forward, especially with regards to the body-worn cameras.
Okay, and then as far as timing goes, when do you expect the officers to actually have them?
That will depend on the cars. So they were ordered a couple, 3-4 months ago. We just got one in that was 5 or 6 weeks behind. So I would suspect toward the end of the year that we would do this, because we will the officers who will get their body cameras first will most likely be the guys who have the car, who drives car 61. That person would be the one that would have that first, and so there'll be a little bit of a lag as we move from car to car, and the officers who are assigned those cars. But it would be
Okay.
toward the end of the year.
And I'd kind of second the idea of having a off-site server backup eventually. So currently, when the video downloads from the cars, it just goes to one server on site. Is that the way it's working currently?
Yes, and I could not speak as to the exact backup of the current arrangement.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I just had one question myself. Would the information recorded in these cameras be then reviewed by a complaint in the Citizen Police Review Board?
It would be a part of that investigation, yes.
Okay. So there's further transparency and there's an opportunity
yeah.
for the community to view these kinds of interactions when there is a complaint and it's brought before the Citizens Review Board.
So currently in the appeals style of complaint process that we have with the CPRB, I would imagine that video review of the body-worn cameras would be subject or be a part of that investigative packet that would be put together for any presentation to the board.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yes, Diane. Oh.
I
don't
just
think there is a
wanted to state that I strongly support
Yeah.
this purchase of the body-worn cameras, and I wanted to express appreciation to Chief Seraphin and Lieutenant Sanders and their team for the care with which they've prepared this presentation. They've researched the issue, took the time to meet with the council members who were able to meet with them last week to provide information. And again, as Alderman Ammons pointed out, this will, and others have pointed out, it's going to improve. It's another tool to improve transparency, accountability, and it adds another level of protection for both the public and for our police officers, and I think that's very important. And there is a great advantage to being the last major department in the county to adopt these. I mean, we have been able to learn from others' experience, and that has been invaluable in choosing the system and doing it in the most cost-effective way. So thank you very much all for the time and effort you've put into it, and for the officers, the FOP as well, for their cooperation and support for this. So this is a major step forward for our department. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That ends the presentation. The next item on our agenda is the staff
You need a
reports.
vote. You need a motion.
After the staff.
Oh, sorry.
I know we're anxious and there's going to be action, but hold on. Okay, are there any staff reports that will come forward at this time? Well, then, there you go. You see, we're moving forward. All right. Next is ordinance number 2018-09-062, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance. This is Budget Amendment 3 concerning body-worn cameras. All right, we've had a good discussion about it already. Is there a motion? Yes.
I'll make a
Jared.
motion that we send ordinance number 2018-09-062, an ordinance revising the annual budget ordinance for budget amendment number 3
Yes.
for body-worn cameras forward to the full council with a recommendation for approval.
That's Jared
Yes.
Miller.
Second.
I will second, or Eric
I
will
think
second.
Eric beat you by a pinch.
Okay.
Eric Jacobson seconded. Is there a discussion now?
Dennis?
Yes, Jared.
So I just wanted to mention to the council that I did spend my Friday night on a ride-along with one of our officers, and it was a very exciting night, so I did spend the most of the rest of my time just hanging out with the officers and getting to know the folks who were there. And just directly in relation to this, there was it's a small sample size. I was only hanging out with about 4 of them. We have 57 officers, so only got to hang out with a few of them, but there was pretty adamant and universal feeling amongst them that this wasn't going to change how they did their jobs. They all said the same thing. They're like, this isn't going to change how I do my job one bit. And I think that goes a long way to say that, they feel like they're, it made me feel like these guys aren't people who feel like they have something to hide, that they're not acting in a way that they feel ashamed of or that they need to change. And although I'm sure there'll be instances that will arise for Chief Seraphin and Lieutenant Sanders and the leadership to have opportunities to point things out when they see things. The officers were all on board. Nobody had anything bad to say about it. I thought that was important to share with you guys.
Okay, thanks, Jared.
I had a question that I didn't get.
Aaron.
Are they covered? How do they cover it from an insurance standpoint? If something happens, something breaks, it's just is that a
The cameras
Elizabeth
themselves?
question? Yeah, I'm just something.
Okay,
that came
there's another question.
With regards to that, the first year, we have the no-fault warranty, that it's good. If it falls in the drink, we can get a new one. That became extremely cost prohibitive as we looked down the future for the life of these, and we started doing some math and figuring that we could straight up replace several each year. So we did purchase the extended, or in the bid, it's for the extended software warranty. So any updates that come out, we will have all of that information. But with regards to the actual hardware itself, 1-year warranty, and then after that, we will then, and we've decided that that was a more cost-effective way to try and move forward. So,
Okay.
Eric Jacobson.
But this hadn't occurred to me, and this is a question, I guess, for Jim. Is the company liable for damage, to people, to process, to, if the cameras fail in such a way that there's really harm done? Does the company liability only extend to replacing the equipment, or does it?
I have not seen the contract on the purchase. I'm not quite sure of a scenario you're thinking of. I'll try to create one. Let's say there's a situation where an officer has to intervene, and as he's approaching, he turns on the camera, and the camera doesn't go on, even though he's done everything, or she has done everything that he or she's been taught to turn and activate, I guess that's the proper term, and the body camera, and it just doesn't work for some reason. It says the battery's fine, but it's not working, and an untoward event occurs between the officer and whoever he or she's approaching. I don't think there's liability there. Let's say the camera explodes on the officer, a battery explodes. If you look at the things, it's going to take a heck of an explosion. I was holding this thing and playing with it and trying to record these guys with their presentations. I'll find it on the download, I guess.
Okay.
But if it explodes, if it's shrapnel, and puts out the eye of a suspect or just a bystander standing right in front of them, that would probably be a products liability case, a standard tort products liability case. A body camera should not explode unless there's something at fault.
I plead guilty to hyper-legalism and don't want to push it any farther.
Thank you.
No, I understand they're biodegradable and digestible.
Okay, Mary Alice.
Okay, one final question. Is there an estimate on the failure rate for the devices, just kind of?
I won't know that. Joel, do you have a thought on that? No.
No. Okay, all right.
But I will tell you that.
Failure. Oh, you'll find out. Okay. I just want to echo what the mayor said. You guys have done an exceptional job at laying down all the questions. As you talked to us, you had predicted what questions we were going to ask, so thank you very much for making that presentation.
I will let you know that I know that this WatchGuard company has, they have their in-car cameras in Danville, and they've lasted, they're like tanks, evidently. These cameras have kept going and kept going and kept going. I know the state police have some as well. So this is something that we kind of reached out a little bit to kind of see, but I just don't have a good number on failure rate for the body cams.
All right, thank you.
Just so you know, they practiced on me first.
Okay, there's an honor. All right, so we have, we've, I think, closed the discussion here, and are we ready to vote on the motion? Okay, those indicated, those who wish to, those who approve the ordinance as stated indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say aye or nay. Okay, none. Okay, so that passes, and that will be going to the City Council for final vote. Okay, next comes a set of ordinances relating to zoning and annexing territory in northwest Urbana. And first comes ordinance number 2018-09-059, an ordinance amending the Urbana zoning map, rezoning a real estate parcel with a permanent index number 91-21-06-451-005 from R3 to R4. And this was planning case 2348-M-18. And we had discussed this in previous committee of the whole, but we withheld advice until tonight. Maybe we'll settle it. So, Kevin Garcia from
Mr.
Community.
Chairman, if I may, just before Kevin starts his presentation.
Yes.
I just wanted to, we ordered these ordinances specifically from the most restrictive discussion to the more expansive discussion, because rezoning has certain conditions that are relevant. And so, to remind the council, for your more restrictive discussion and also for the benefit of the public, I thought I might read the criteria to consider in rezoning cases.
Very good, then. Thank you for that.
Okay. There are 8. The existing land uses and zoning of the nearby property. The extent to which property values are diminished by the restrictions of the ordinance. The extent to which the ordinance promotes the health, safety, morals, or general welfare of the public. The relative gain to the public as compared to the hardship imposed on the individual property owner. The suitability of the subject property for the zoned purposes. The length of time the property has been vacant as zoned, considered in the context of land development in the area in the vicinity of the subject property. The community's need for more of the proposed use, and the care with which the community has planned its land use development. Those are the criteria that may be considered. Thank you.
Okay, so that is very specific, and our discussion will have to center on some of those issues. All right, so Kevin, do you want to make any small presentation on this before we have a discussion?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to just briefly go through the supplemental memo that was sent to you last week. So thanks, Carol, for the introduction. So I just wanted to go through the memo that you received had ran through a series of questions that we're not able to answer at the time. So I'm just going to go through those in order. The first pertained to the Human Rights Ordinance. We have shared the Human Rights Ordinance with Trinitas Development, and as they've stated in the attached letter in Exhibit I, they will comply with the ordinance. I wanted to briefly pass it over to Todd Brent to discuss minority and female-owned business subcontracting, which was brought up at the last committee meeting.
Okay, then Todd. Welcome.
Evening. Good evening. Thank you for having me. So I just wanted to briefly talk about where we are and provide a status on minority and female, or the promotion of minority and female contracting in city procurement. So currently we're working on amendments to the Urbana City Code. I think it's section 2-119 that would authorize the establishment of goals for the utilization of minority and female-owned subcontractors with city-administered procurement projects. The amendments require city contractors and vendors who conduct business with the city of Urbana that are business that would be of a dollar amount above certain thresholds to undertake certain good faith efforts to retain minority and female-owned subcontracting firms where practicable. While the draft amendment, and right now the draft amendments are pretty much completed, what we're trying to do right now is develop administrative rules that go with those draft amendments and present those to the Human Relations Commission. What they will do is they will really flesh out exactly on a day-to-day implementation basis exactly how the ordinance language will be implemented on the ground. So once we have that language reviewed by the Human Relations Commission and the administrative rules approved, then the plan is to bring both the ordinance language and the rules that explain how the ordinance language will be implemented, to bring those before the council for approval. And speaking, again, specifically of city procurement projects.
Well, thank you. That was a topic of great interest to the City Council, and I appreciate the update that you've given us. All right, so, community development, are you ready to proceed with your comments then?
Yes, sure. Actually, before I proceed, Lori just pointed out that on the agenda, 2 of the ordinances are actually out of order. So number 9 and number 10 on the agenda should be flipped because we can't, we don't want to consider annexing certain territory to the city of Urbana before considering the annexation agreement for that territory.
So those should be interchanged.
Yes. So the order, if you're following along at home, should be 59, 58, 60.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay, so the second question wanted to address is relating to the traffic impact analysis. We included in the supplemental staff memo an excerpt from the traffic impact analysis, specifically highlighting the projected traffic on Carver Drive, and you can find that in Exhibit F. So there's not really a lot of traffic expected for the whole site, and on Carver Drive specifically, the projected traffic would only be about 5% of morning traffic that would be exiting the site. So that's just 5 additional cars on Carver Drive. And then in the evening peak hour would be about 9% or 8 cars entering Carver Drive during the peak hour at night. So while some additional traffic is inevitable, because after all, the site is a cornfield right now, the increase is not expected to be a lot, especially on Carver Drive. The next question pertained to the annexation agreement. The annexation agreement was missing a general area plan that has now been included in Exhibit G. Wanted to briefly touch on the Champaign City Council proceedings that I attended last week on the 18th. Champaign City Council voted unanimously to rezone the portion of the development in Champaign from SF1, which is single family, to MF1, which is multifamily. They also unanimously voted to approve the preliminary plat for the site. And at that meeting, there were no public comments that were given. Since the committee meeting on the 10th, we received one piece of comment of public correspondence that came from Bishop Gwynn of the Church of the Living God over on Bradley Avenue and Oak Street. And Bishop Gwynn submitted a letter of support for the proposed development, which you can find in Exhibit E. We've also included the draft Plan Commission meeting minutes from the September 6th meeting in Exhibit H. Those minutes were not finished by the time of the last committee meeting. And then, see, also for reference, we included the parameters for evaluating rezoning cases that Carol Mitten just read before my presentation. And then finally, as you consider the required criteria, and we think that it's important to consider the potential benefits that this project could bring to the city of Urbana. So aside from property tax revenue, adding 1,100 new people to the area would provide a larger customer base for the existing businesses along Lincoln Avenue. And then in the long term, adding that many people could help be a catalyst for new business development on both Lincoln and potentially Bradley Avenue. That concludes my report, and I can take any questions.
Okay, well, does the committee have questions for Kevin? Okay, let's start with Mary Alice Wu.
I'm
quick
not
hand.
sure if you're the correct person to ask this traffic question, or if perhaps the developers could answer. It's a long report. I did attempt to read it. I was hoping that you could walk me through a couple of things. The first thing is that based on my understanding, you've got about 180 cars going back and forth in the morning and the evening for the entire property. Is that a good summary? It's on page.
It might be the best idea to have the traffic consultant, who I think is here, respond to any of the traffic
Okay, so my questions are traffic, so if you want me to hold, I can hold. Doesn't matter to me.
No, I mean, you're asking a question. I think the person
Okay.
representing the developer can come forward and answer you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi. So I'm trying to get a handle, so just to kind of give you a little bit of background about what my concerns were was with Carver Drive being a very nice, small residential area and having
Yes.
an impact on the increased traffic. And there were some residents who came here concerned about the impact on their kids playing outside in the road and so forth. So as I looked at some of this, I noticed that a lot of your analysis had to do with assuming that Carver would only be open to emergency traffic. But I believe last time, 2 weeks ago, that this was up, there was a conversation that Champaign wanted that to be open more beyond the emergency vehicles. So I believe it was figure 3.5 that talked about Carver being open to beyond the emergency vehicles. Is that correct?
Let me find figure 3.5 real quick.
It's also the one that was in the packet, so
Okay. So,
for us, yeah.
Yes, that would be one of the figures where we had Carver open. So we did analysis for the first construction year, so 2019, or the first year they might have residents in place, and 2029, which is when we assumed the full build-out year. And we did those analyses for both with Carver closed to normal traffic and open to normal traffic. So what we looked at, and the reason why we came up with a very low number of vehicles using Carver is essentially as a two-way stop-controlled street. So anybody who wants to leave that during the peak hour would have to find an opening where they could make a left turn, most likely, because that's the direction to get to campus, would have to find an opening where they could get across Bradley. And given the through traffic on Bradley that will not be stopping, we estimated the delay to be high enough that most users that are going to be in a hurry are going to use an alternate route, probably going down to 4th Street, which is a four-way stop-controlled intersection already. So they just wouldn't be using Carver.
Are there any plans, because you had also talked about what would need to be done in terms of increasing the roads or stoppage or roundabouts and so forth. Is there any proposal to put a stop sign at the end of Carver to the entrance of that development? Because there was also stuff about speed and how fast people could get through and so forth. So it certainly significantly slows down the number of people and how fast they are driving on that road.
I agree with you that that could be a potential issue. However, that's not actually an intersection. We're not forming a controlled intersection at the entrance or exit point of the development, so that would typically not meet criteria for a stop sign.
But it's possible to put a stop sign there legally.
I don't know actually directly off the top of my head what is allowed by your city code for stop
Okay.
sign installations.
Fair enough.
We follow the state criteria for establishing stop signs and control signals.
So my guess is that if that follows the manual and uniform traffic control devices, that it would not be warranted.
Okay, and then...
You could put up a pedestrian warning or a yield sign of some sort, most likely, but you can't put up a stop sign.
Okay, all right. I realize it's also Champaign Road and not Urbana Road, so I understand that. So the estimate was 5% of the cars would go through here? Is that correct?
So actually, if you read the footnotes that we have, on a lot of our impact study, we put a 5 in when the number was below anywhere from 0 to 5. Mostly because we're getting into an area where our estimated models are, I don't want to say inaccurate, but it has a very hard time predicting partial cars. So
All right.
to be safe, we went with a conservative value of 5, just to see what the impact would be.
Is there a way, Charlie, to put this slide up? Because I just would like to be walked through this specific slide, which is figure 3.5, because it's, for somebody who doesn't do this on a daily basis, it's a little confusing. All right. So it's page 15 in that.
Okay. And while I'm getting to page 15 and flipping it over, I actually mislabeled a couple of these in the So the one that's labeled federal on here, why is that not rotating? Oops. Okay, this should rotate. No? There we go.
There we go.
Okay, so, sorry, where it says federal here, should say, this should be flipped with this, so that should say 4th and the main street, so, but anyway, I think we're talking about Carver, so.
So if you
looking
could
at
just
those.
describe exactly what we're seeing here, that would be helpful.
So what you have on figure 3.5 is, as it's labeled, is our added site trips. So those are the trips that we believe the development will generate at each location. So specifically for Carver, the number that is not in parentheses is the morning traffic that would be added. The number that is in parentheses is what we believe to be the afternoon traffic that would be added. And this is just traffic that is going to occur during what we identify as the peak hour. So commonly 7:30 to 8:30 or 8 to 9 in the morning, and then usually 4:30 to 5:30, 5 to 6 p.m. in the afternoon and evening. That doesn't mean that there won't be other trips at other times of the day, but typically the peak hours are when we see the highest impact to your traffic system.
So basically, the idea is that you're going to have more people just going through Bradley and Carver intersection, not turning there on Carver, if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, so that's what we...
So that's the 5, 12, and 3 and 8?
Yes.
Yes.
So those would most likely then, if they're coming from this development site, those would be vehicles that are exiting on 4th, most likely, could possibly be exiting on 5th, and making a left turn to go through. That's the 5 and the 12 is. So those are not trips that are just general growth in the area from 10 years from now. This is what we believe the site will actually produce.
In 2029?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So just quickly, I do have a follow-up from a
Sure.
traffic standpoint. So I don't do this either, but why are you saying that there's only going to be 5 people or 5 cars entering this way? So if we enter through Carver Drive and there's going to be allegedly or in the future there would be a entryway into the development there, right?
Okay.
And given that this is going to be primarily students who are living here, Lincoln Avenue is the closest way for them to travel to get to campus. And you're saying that only 5 cars are going to leave out of the development or enter the development when they can just go east on Bradley Avenue and go right to Lincoln Avenue?
Yes, that's correct.
So I don't do what you do for a profession, but I live here, and there's no way people are going to drive all the way down to 4th Street or 5th Street to get to campus, and it's much more congested than when they can just take Lincoln Avenue and go straight to campus.
Well, I'm not doubting that they won't take Lincoln Avenue, and our model actually probably shows that. But what we believe is that because of the number of vehicles that will be going straight through the intersection of Carver, so staying on Bradley, that the amount of time that you'll have to wait to make that left turn off of Carver onto Bradley to get to Lincoln is more than what it would take for you just to proceed out to 4th Street and make the left turn where you've got a stop sign and you've got a gap in traffic built for you.
Okay. Other
And
questions?
Yeah, I had
Oh,
more, but it was
You do.
outside of that, because coming out of Carver, turning left onto Bradley, at this point is not a very difficult. It's not like it's a bunch of traffic and congestion on Bradley Avenue that's stopping you from turning left off of Carver to get to Lincoln. So the idea that people who live in there are going to have to wait a long time to get onto Bradley Avenue, I just don't, my lived experience doesn't tell me that that's a problem for the people who live on Carver. Could speak to something like that as well. So am I missing something?
Well, and I appreciate that. What we do is we don't look at each intersection in a vacuum. We build a computer-based micro-simulation model. So it looks at all the trips and the volumes that already exist on these roadways. So we're looking at how popular or how busy these roads are, and we look at those growth patterns then. And then we assign all 6 of these intersections simultaneously with the number of trips that we identify as likely being generated by the site. and then the model itself, based on all of the criteria we give it, assign the trips out and also accounts for these delays. So it does a best assessment as possible to identify the routes that are most likely to be taken by people that are living in the site.
It would be advantageous if you move the mic closer to your
I'm
edge
sorry.
of the table.
Okay. I just didn't want to lean onto the table, so.
You can, though. It's all right. Others do. Okay, Bill Brown.
Yeah, I have a traffic question too, and I think Aaron has some other questions. I don't really doubt the vehicle volumes that your model came up with, considering how much of the development will actually be on local parking lot roads in that area close to Carver. Most of it will be on the main roads and probably have easier access to 4th or 5th. And when you're in a car, distance doesn't matter as much. But what I'm more interested in is, I guess, why traffic impact analysis don't also make arrangements for pedestrians and bicycles more often. I know you took into consideration the reduction of vehicle traffic based on some assumptions on pedestrian and bicycle and mass transit usage. I think those were a little low. It was 2.8% bicycle, your consultant said, in the area. I think that's probably a citywide number.
I believe that's probably where we drew the number from, yes.
Okay. In the most recent census for that area specifically, it was 6.8% bicycle, or no, wait, 5.9% is 6.8% pedestrian that are already biking to work in that area. And that's a overall average throughout the year. That's the way the ACS calculates it. It's every couple of weeks they take a sample. So during peak periods, it could be 8, 9, 10%. So I think that's a little low. In my neighborhood, which is also, it's a 1.5 mile trip for me to get to work. On bike, it's about 8 minutes with one stoplight. So it's a real bikeable neighborhood. I mean, I know people think it's a long way from campus, but when you actually measure the distance to, especially North Campus, it's really a mile and a half, 2 miles is real bikeable. So I do think that people using bikes would use Carver because we have a nice bike path all the way down Goodwin, which isn't that far from Carver. So I hope that in your final development that will, even if it's an emergency entrance, and I don't know if you've decided for sure or not, at least have it open to bicycles and pedestrians. They do have sidewalks all along Carver. There's sidewalks along Bradley. You have gotten me thinking more about how bicycles get across Bradley during busy times, but I guess that's something we'll have to, or we or Champaign would have to address at the time. So I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but do traffic impact analysis pretty much just focus on vehicle traffic?
We do because they have the greatest impact to the roadway system. Typically, the use of pedestrian and bicycle numbers just allow us to reduce the traffic impact load. And I'm a professional traffic engineer, so that's my role and my job on this. Is I personally love getting people out of their cars. It means we don't have to build new lanes, we don't have to modify intersections. So.
Right, and for cities like us that have adopted complete street policies, and Champaign's also adopted one, and U of I has also adopted one. Does that change your traffic analysis at all?
We're comfortable with the numbers that we used, mostly because we feel they're conservative. So therefore, we're looking at more closely the worst case scenario, rather than possibly risking overemphasizing bicycling or pedestrians, which would then give us an invalid final determination of what would happen to the roads. So I would love to see numbers even higher than what you're currently seeing, because it's good for everybody. But at the same time, for the purposes of this study, I think we're comfortable with our numbers.
Trying to be conservative, basically,
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Then Aaron Emmons.
So I did have a traffic follow-up before I can move on.
Oh, no problem.
Because thinking about 5th and 6th Street, or especially 4th and 5th Street.
Mm-hmm.
So 4th Street, does the analysis take into consideration the frequency and the length of the trains on that track and how that might affect the traffic backup at all?
Which traffic backup would be the
So,
concern?
for those of us who live here, we understand that on 4th Street, on Bradley Avenue, when there's a train on that track, it's typically a 10, 15, 20, depending on if it stops and backs up or not. The train is a long train, and traffic builds up at that particular spot. There could be 10, 15, 20 cars there, all trying to turn around to go back down 4th Street so that they can get to the viaduct that is on Washington Street. And so if there's a high volume of cars who are coming out of the complex adding to that, then that's going to create another dynamic. I didn't know if that would result in a stoplight or something like that at that location. I know, Mary Alice, you were speaking of a stop sign, but I'm just saying that those situations.
Well, as a four-way stop, it shouldn't, unless drivers choose to wait for the train and block the intersection, it should still be able to operate the three legs that remain.
And
without
they
an
don't
issue.
typically block the intersection, but when you were saying taking time, the amount of time that it would take a person to get off of Carver Drive onto Bradley, that situation in that scenario also increases at certain times when there's a train on the track at the 4th Street, the 4th and Bradley intersection as well. So I was just throwing that out there
Well,
to see
no,
if that was
and
part
I
of the.
I appreciate that, and Champaign did not address, or did not raise that as a concern of theirs when they reviewed the traffic study.
That's interesting.
But typically for a four-way stop-controlled intersection, if it's not blocked, anybody that's coming out of the development will be able to make a left at the stop sign or go straight through. I guess primarily, do you see traffic, though, just for my own curiosity, do you see traffic from the tracks backing up to 4th Street and then the other side of that stop sign back still even further down the
No,
down the street?
it typically doesn't get that bad because the people
Okay.
can see that they better turn before they get into that much of a traffic jam. But if you're driving along and the gates come down, it can quickly build up.
Sure.
And
Well,
then you.
I live over in Terre Haute, Indiana, so we have multitude of train problems very similar to that.
Okay. All right. So my questions were actually on a different level now, Kevin. If you, thank you. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Sure. Just while I'm here, are there any other traffic questions I can help with?
Okay, I guess we've exhausted the number of questions that we want to ask
Of traffic.
of traffic.
Yes.
So is there anything else left
Yes.
that you want to exhaust?
Yeah, so Kevin, thank you for the presentation. The things that you offered as a benefit for the city of Urbana, you talked about property tax revenue, 1,100 new people, and then is a catalyst for new businesses on Bradley Avenue. So first, the 1,100 new people, there's a concern that's been raised from people who have called me and emailed me or whatever about this, stopped me and talked to me about it, that we have several buildings that are not at capacity. So I don't know if this is a question for the developer. That's what we're going to do to make sure that this is at capacity, especially given that I haven't heard of any affordable housing being attached to this proposal. And then more particularly what struck me was what you said about a catalyst for new businesses on Bradley Avenue. Where would those new businesses go on Bradley Avenue?
Probably, I mean, if you were looking long-term, you'd probably be looking a bit east. So, you know, you've got this church down here. You have a couple of properties down here that are zoned business. You have that new funeral home that's over here that opened recently. Probably, if you're thinking long-term for businesses on Bradley, you'd probably need some rezoning. But I was just thinking, if you're looking long-term, having more residents in this area would be a reason to see some business development on Bradley.
Well,
if the neighbors wanted to see that, or if the people wanted some business in the area.
This is speculation generally.
Yeah.
We don't know what kind of development will occur in the future on private property. Yes, Diane.
One site that we will be keeping an eye on is the water company site, the pits that are there on Broadley Avenue with the decommissioning of the site on Lincoln. They're also going to be clearing that site as well. So that is an area that could very well be developed in the not so long-term future. And I have long thought we needed a grocery store, things like a restaurant, something up in that area to serve the residents there. So that's the kind of businesses I would want to see in that location.
Well, I appreciate that, because the food desert that we currently have in that block of space is a very real issue, and even the grocery store on Springfield and 4th Street is a very costly grocery store, because it was really designed for students to patronize the business there. And for mid to lower income people, that is not a real option on a regular basis. And that's part of the concern, that all of these years where this has been this food desert, now with the newfound interest in this region of our community, where we see new development all around it, now there's more of an interest for grocery stores and the things that should have been a priority a long time ago. So, and in that vein, the population and the people who will be there will change. And I think, Kevin, whether you intended or you have some vision or some access to a plan that I don't have access to talk about development on Bradley Avenue, other than that location, it just feeds the narrative that people like Dr. Underwood and other members of my constituency who say that this is a part of a grand plan to move them out and to move more other people into this particular space when you start talking about businesses on Bradley Avenue, because that is a highly residential area other than the churches and the funeral home that's across the street from it. So I just thought it was interesting that there would be some conversation about business development on Bradley Avenue after we have this conversation about this proposed development that we're discussing tonight. So those were some of the questions that I just had for you, or the comments that I wanted to make publicly to make sure that it was a part of the record. So I don't have a question for you at this particular point. Thanks.
Okay, Jared Miller.
Kevin, I just had one question on number 7 of the LaSalle criteria, the community's need for more of the proposed use. And specifically to this project, but also more generally, does the city keep a wish list, if you will, of some kind, a tracking of, what kind of developments we need, that we would like to see? And as far as the city's analysis is concerned, has this met any of those criteria, if and they do exist?
To my knowledge, we don't keep a list of that type.
I'd like to make a comment about that.
Carol Mitten.
Thank you. One of the things that stands out about this for us is that this is a development that the owner is not asking for any kind of incentive from the city, and in my short time here, that stands out for me. So I think it's important that they have judged the market and they think that they can make this work without any assistance, and that's telling.
Okay. No, I wouldn't disagree with that notion by any means. It's I think when I ask about that, our city has sometimes had an unfortunate history of allowing places to be built with a specific intended purpose to which they did not end up being used for. Specifically in Diane's former ward and my current ward, there were apartments that were built, supposed to be, constructed for college students, quite far from campus in the middle of a very residential neighborhood that was full of single-family homes, and exactly the area of which I speak, and they did not end up being used for that and are now one of our troubled areas in the city. And I know that when development companies see an opportunity to make money and, have a good chance to do something like this, the long-term commitment does not seem very evident to me as far as where they're going. So this is, my concern, considering that even though I wasn't on council, obviously, because these apartments were constructed back in the 70s or 80s, but the long-term impact of that is significant. So this is why I'm asking about that need and how we make this judgment based on the LaSalle criteria for this specific zoning, because of all the different reasons why we need to consider that this is an appropriate place, this is the appropriate time, and these are the right folks to do it. Oh, I guess I don't specifically have a question about that other than the city doesn't keep track of what we're trying to see happen, generally speaking, for development. I mean, other than, you know, we've made priorities, you know, like business development on Bell Road and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think we play more a role of letting the market dictate what proposals get, or what developments get proposed, and we play the role of facilitating whatever, you know, our economic development folks help facilitate certain developments. But as Carol said, this particular development is not asking for any incentives, so.
Sure, no, and I get that. I just think, you know, I don't want to be the person that 30 years from now other council members look back at and say, I can't believe they let them build that there. What were they thinking? The way people talk about the apartment complex that's in my ward that does not get used for students whatsoever. That was its original intended use. So it's just comment to council members, to city staff, development staff in general. I don't know what may be different today than how the city functioned. Obviously, much has changed. Our city code has changed and all these kinds of things. But those are considerations we all need to remember when we're considering, especially something of this scale.
We're really mixing commentary and not necessarily asking questions, which is not really best form here. So we're going to have a chance to have a discussion among the city council members that could be very thorough in a few minutes. Bill Brown?
I have a question on the rezoning of the lot to be annexed. Do you want me to hold that for now, or
No,
is this, can we answer questions to that?
No, I think
Okay.
we're asking you to consider the rezonings together. So,
Okay.
I mean, while the annexation agreement has the rezoning piece with it, I think just talking about rezonings in general is good.
So on that, the property to the north is already zoned industrial, right?
It is, that's correct.
So the difference between an industrial adjoining an industrial lot and an industrial adjoining R4 lot would create different screening requirements?
Correct.
So if, right now they don't have anything built on the south side of their lot,
Mhm.
if they were to want to build there, would they have new screening requirements to meet, or would they be grandfathered in and only have to meet the screening requirements? I mean, it's actually not, the lot that we could annex isn't zoned anything right now. It's, but it was anticipated it would be industrial.
Mhm.
So is that enough of a reason for them to claim that they don't need as much screening or as much setback because they were expecting that to be industrial?
No, the question is, you are very prescient. The property to the north is currently in the process of doing a subdivision. And as part of that process, I let them know that there was this rezoning, potential rezoning going on, and informed them that they would be subject to new screening requirements, and they have had no problem with that.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if we have no more questions for Kevin and community development, we can have a discussion. Oh, I guess we should have a motion first and then discussion.
I had a question for the developers.
Well, all right. Question for the developers.
All right, good evening, y'all.
Good evening.
Did you mentioned earlier, could you say your name again, both of you, please?
Alex Sanders.
Kimberly Hansen.
All right, so you all mentioned last Monday or Monday before last that there was a property that you owned in Savoy, or your company owned in Savoy. Which property was that?
It's the village at Colbert Park. Yeah, just make sure I get the name stuff right.
So it's not Winfield Village?
No, it's not.
Do you do any development that has a percentage of affordable housing in it?
Do we have any currently? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, or have you done any recently, or do you have any currently that you're doing that has?
Affordable as in the city is providing affordable users for the property? If so, if that's the question, yes, we have a few that we're working through right now.
Would you elaborate on where those might be? Or what do you-
Yes, one is in, I don't know how much I can elaborate on it. One's in California right now, which the state of California has affordable housing shortage. So we're working very closely with the state and the local municipality in order to make everything work for that project to be built.
So it's when you're working with the municipality that you have the affordable housing initiative like this, where you're not asking for anything from the city or anybody else. Do you implement a program, a 70-30 or 80-20 type of program that allows for a percentage of affordable housing in your projects?
We have not in the past, just because it's a little, when it comes to that, it's a little difficult for us. We do have to ask the city for a little help, but in this particular case, we did not.
So when you do the analysis of this area, as far as what the demands are, what we need affordable housing, right? So is there any particular reason why then, when you look at that you didn't make this model or try to reach out to the city of Champaign or to the other entities for support for affordable housing?
We also, affordable housing is a need for the city. We also saw a need for young professional affordable housing. Affordable, the term being a little different, as in less expensive than what's currently available for them. So we decided to go with that model since it's more, since it's closer to the model that we use mostly.
So when you say young professionals, that also means students, right?
Yes, it can. We we have this geared to people, students, young professionals, usually between the ages of 20 and 32.
So we're still talking college age, master's degree type of a group of students who would still be, you know, that's why we've talked so much about 4th Street, 5th Street, and the corridor leading to campus, because that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and people that may also work in those areas. I would say I'm a young professional, but I'm not a student. And if it was a way for me to live more affordably than I can in a home versus a skyrise, then I probably would go to a project similar to this.
And so the need for the affordable housing in this area, right there in that space in particular, you don't see, the company doesn't see an opportunity to create some level of that? I wouldn't be open to a project that has some affordable housing in it? Yes,
and again, it depends on the different deal by deal. We would be open to the conversation with it. And we have looked for a conversation for people's ideas for the projects, which is why we had some the city meetings and things of that nature. But again, for this particular project, this would work best for our model and what we thought would be most successful in that area.
So, I mean, I know several young professionals, and when I think of the area in which you all are targeting for the development, and I certainly think that these are predominantly African-American areas in the city of Champaign. I certainly think that there's a need for development, and I'm supportive of development, increase the tax base for everyone, but I'm not in support of something that would ultimately drive out the people who live in there, because the increase in the rental rates and the increase for these young professionals are not the amount that most people are going to be able to afford who live in that particular area. So the rental rates would drive up, and so now you're not actually complementing the area of the people who already live there. So if there was affordable housing there, then that would attract some of the people to stay there. But otherwise, that's not something that the people overall are going to be attracted to. It's going to be a different crowd. So I just had those couple of questions for you all directly. I appreciate you answering the questions.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we've come to a close on questions for the developers. Would anybody like to make a motion, and then we could have discussion? Bill Brown.
Yeah, I'll move we forward ordinance number 2018-09059, ordinance amending Urbana zoning map rezoning real estate parcel with permanent index number 912106-451-005 from R3 to R4 to City Council with recommendation for approval.
I will second that.
Seconded by Dean Hazen. All right, so I think that opens up to discussion now, if we want to have some more discussion. Well, that was questions from the developer. So now we have, this is like, actually the format that the city council members should be following, so. Mary Alice Wu.
Using Jared's comment as a jumping off point, I was looking at the comprehensive plan and looking at the current zoning. And so my question to the mayor is, do we have plans to update the comprehensive plan?
I'm going to turn that over to our planning manager.
Lori?
Yes, it's long overdue.
Yes, it's long overdue. I'm glad to hear the mayor say that. It should be updated. We don't have any immediate plans. There could be a cost component associated with that. Perhaps that's what's held it up thus far. But it's true, we should do some updates. That's the best I can give you right now.
So the comprehensive plan was 2005, is that right?
Yes, there was a minor amendment in 2006. But
Okay, all right. It just seems like we keep, whenever we get these zoning cases, and that's how it relates here, whenever we get these zoning cases, we always go back to the comprehensive plan and we say, how does that meet? This does not meet. I understand why it doesn't meet because of the church and so forth. But then if we start talking about businesses and growing businesses along the Bradley corridor, we also don't have that in the comprehensive plan. So in my short tenure on this council, it seems like we continually have these things arise because things change, and water places
No one
leak.
anticipated the water company leaving.
Exactly. So I mean, and I get that things change, but I do think based on some of the conversation tonight and previous conversations, certainly looking at low-income housing, I think should be something that we should start looking at with the change in how we are seeing all the different high-rises that are going on and potentially pushing out affordable housing for people who cannot afford to live
We
in
are
those
looking at
high-rises.
options in other locations.
Okay.
So this is
I just wanted to
this
put
is not
forth-
the only location.
Right.
This proposal is, well, you have to consider this proposal as is.
Absolutely. I just wanted to put that out there since Jared gave me the opportunity to do that, so thank you.
Well, I might just also mention something that I had mentioned, I think, at the previous meeting, which is that very soon we're going to be having a conversation about mayor-council priorities and the resource requirements of moving the needle on those priorities. And affordable housing it was not articulated as one of those priorities. So I just ask you to put that in a context.
Okay, Bill Brown.
Yeah, I support the rezoning for both of these. It's already R4 next to it. I think there's been no single-family or duplex development in that area other than Habitat for as long as I can remember, several decades at least. So it seems like a reasonable use for that property. I know there's also the industrial lot. I know there's some demand for light industrial, so I still kind of wish it had been a little different property, but I'm fine with the rezoning. I do think it would benefit having more roofs, more bedrooms in that area to encourage businesses to build the grocery store and some of the other services we want near Lincoln Avenue exit. It's near the interstate, near primary access to the university campus. and really is, as Aaron said, one of the biggest food deserts in either Champaign or Urbana. So if that's what it takes to encourage somebody to develop that property where the water company's leaving, then that's great. And like I said, I think it's a really bikeable commute to campus. So I really don't see many downsides. I do think most of the vehicle traffic will be on 4th and 5th Street, so Champaign will have to deal with that. But yeah, I support it.
Eric Jacobson.
Yeah, I intend to support this. On balance, I don't see economic models that I understand don't say that building new housing without, impinging on existing housing stock, but just building new housing, I think is not going to drive rents up anywhere else. I think it's a appropriate use, based on LaSalle criteria, based on the overall plan of the city. I think it's definitely an appropriate use for that particular area. I just want to address Jared's concerns about, some of the housing projects that we've had in the city in the past that have gone south. And one of the things that's happened since those very early days is we have started doing much more oversight on rental housing, on how people keep their property, on landlord practices. And while nothing is guaranteed, I think it's much less likely. I think those kinds of disasters have become less likely because of the oversight that we do.
Okay, so, yeah, Aaron.
So for me, when I look at the LaSalle criteria, I too look at what Jared pointed to for number 7. We have 3 huge apartment complexes that have gone up on University Avenue. 2 in Champaign, 1 in Urbana. Then we have 3 more along Lincoln Corridor that have gone up, huge apartment complexes. And there are 2 more going up on University that are not as big. One of them just finished, and one right there on the corner of 4th and University, and then there's going to be another one about a block down of another apartment complex. And when you go up just a little bit further south on 4th Street, they're building another one over there. So do we need more student housing? No, we don't need any more student housing. It is not a need for that proposed use by any stretch of the imagination. Given that, that concern, and I don't think the general welfare of the area over there is being taken into consideration from an affordable housing standpoint, and I think that's a concern for the proposed use, is not considering that. So I do not think it's meeting that criteria, so I would not be supporting it.
Other comments or questions? Okay. Okay, Bill Brown.
I just, to Aaron's point, I do think that this is a little different type of housing. It sounds like and looks like it should be more affordable. We don't know what the rents are going to be. Yeah, it's not going to be $300 a month, but it might be something that somebody who works on campus, and not everyone who works on campus is a professor. A lot of people who work on campus make $30,000 to $50,000 a year, and this would be a good location for them because those people can't really afford to live in West Urbana or other places nearby campus. So anybody that wants to do without a car and save some money for a while, this would be another good option for them, I think.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a vote. All those in favor of the zoning ordinance 2008-09-059 indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, 2 are opposed. So I believe that motion carries. And that will go forward to City Council for final approval. I suggest we take a 3-minute break because I think that we're still going to be here for another hour and a half. So I call for a 3-minute break.
This is
Yes?
I think there's only one last thing on the agenda.
No, I don't think so, because we
There's
have 2
3?
ordinances still to go.
Oh, but aren't these all together? Oh, they're all related?
They're related, but they're individual ordinances.
Okay, all right, you're the chair, sorry.
Okay?
All right.
Okay. Coming back into session. We're going to pick up again now at, we're going to go down to ordinance number 2018-09-058. As I recall, we had a rearrangement of our schedule. This is an ordinance approving an annexation agreement, a real estate parcel with permanent index number 30-21-06-326-015, the Judy Heimberger Trust and Trinitas Development LLC. Does community development want to begin, or Bill Brown, you have a question
I'll
already?
move approval.
Second. Send to
Oh,
council
sorry,
with
I'll
rec-
move to
yes.
send this to council with recommendation for approval.
Second.
Well, this is most interesting. Bill Brown made the motion and seconded by Eric? Is that correct? All right. All right, so now let's open it up to discussion. Wait, Aaron Amons is not here, and he's not going to feel
There he
happy
is.
if he doesn't have a chance to ask about something. All right, we're coming back into order here, and we've had a motion. We've had a motion to send this to council with approval. Is not? Yes, that's correct. Now we're into discussion. Yes. Mary Alice Wu.
My question is with regards to this ordinance and the one that's coming up, are the only criteria that we're supposed to use for this LaSalle criteria?
Lori Pearson can probably answer that, or some other individual. Approving an annexation agreement.
Certainly for the rezoning component of this annexation agreement, you are bound to the LaSalle criteria. In terms of the annexation agreement as a whole thing, the idea behind an annexation agreement is to basically outline the rules and responsibilities of each party, the city and the owner, on what would be necessary in order to annex that parcel. In terms of the next item, just to answer that future question for you, the annexation is pretty perfunctory in that if they are willing to meet the annexation agreement provisions, then as a city, if we have entered into an annexation agreement, we are saying we want to annex that property.
So if I look at the memo from 2 weeks ago, I think that there was an outline in terms of the comprehensive plan, in terms of the goals that were met. Are those what we're supposed to use to either do annexation or not annexation?
So for the, in consideration of the annexation agreement, certainly yes. You could look at things like the comprehensive plan. But as you pointed out, the comprehensive plan, well, perhaps you didn't point this out, but the comprehensive plan actually doesn't cover this parcel.
Right, right.
So you could generally think about if our comprehensive plan supports that, if that's helpful to you.
But there's no actual law that says what we have to use in terms of
Except for
annexation.
the rezoning component.
Except for the rezoning.
Mhm.
Thank you very much.
And we've already jumped that hurdle. Yes, Eric.
So as I read through this, not being a lawyer conversant in these matters, it looked to me like legal boilerplate. And so my question is there any part of it that wasn't that was where there was actually some substantive give and take in coming to the agreement.
Your assessment is correct. There wasn't anything beyond the specific zoning information that was off of the boilerplate language.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Okay, I guess seeing none, all those in favor of approving this ordinance and sending it forward to City Council with approval indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those who oppose indicate by saying nay or whatever. Or same. All right, do we have anybody who opposes? Okay, I guess that's unanimous then. All right, so that passes and goes forward to the City Council next week. Okay, we're coming up to ordinance number 10, which is ordinance number 2018-09-060, an ordinance annexing certain territory to the city of Urbana, a real estate parcel with permanent index number 30-21-06-326-015, the Judy Heimberger Trust. I guess community development doesn't have any particular presentation for this. So I'd suggest that there be a motion made. Bill Brown?
I'll move to send ordinance number 2018-09-060 to City Council with recommendation for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Eric Jacobson. All right, discussion on this. Okay, there doesn't seem to be anybody who wishes to discuss it, so those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed? Okay, this will go forward to the City Council with approval. Okay, I guess that's it for the zoning questions. And now we're going to go to ordinance number 2018-09-063, an ordinance amending the Urbana City Code, Chapter 3, Section 3-43, increasing the number of Class R-1 liquor licenses for La Mexica Incorporated, DBA, La Mexica, 510 North Cunningham Avenue, Suite 5 in Urbana, Illinois.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Jared.
Thank you.
What's up, Jared?
Pursuant to the Illinois Liquor Control Act of 1934, and probably for the last time that I sit on this council, I will have to recuse myself from this vote.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your honesty on that. All right. Okay, Mary, did you want to say anything about this at all?
Yes, I just wanted to say that La Mixteca is an existing restaurant, and they have applied for a Class R1 liquor license. So it means they'll be serving alcohol at the restaurant, and you'll be able to get a margarita with some very delicious dinners. So
It's advantageous.
yes.
Okay, so any discussion about this liquor license? Okay, those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. So that goes forward.
Is there, we need
Is there
a motion?
on the floor?
Oh, did I not get a motion? All right, thank you.
I'll make a motion.
All right. Mary Alice Wu.
I'd like to make a motion for ordinance number 2018-09063, an ordinance amending Urbana City Code, Chapter 3, Section 343, with a recommendation for approval to City Council.
I'll second it.
Aaron will second it. Okay, so we have Alice made the motion, Aaron seconded it, and I jumped the gun, but now I'll ask those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, ayes have it. Yes.
Just before
Aaron
you
Adams.
adjourn, I wanted to say something before you adjourned.
Yes,
All
go
right.
ahead then, Aaron.
So I failed to say this when Chief Seraphin and Lieutenant Sanders were doing their presentation. about the body-worn cameras. Often, because of the way things work in our society, the individuals like the folks who were raising concerns for many years, CU Citizens for Peace and Justice, organizations in which I was a part of, many of those members in the organizing and activist community were pushing issues like this as we were concerned about tasers and concerned about other things in relationship to the police department. The body cameras were things that we came up with, that we proposed. I am happy, very happy that the police department is on board with it. I also think it's important to recognize that when citizens make proposals and bring forth ideas to the city council or to the legal bodies or the elected bodies, that we see and we thank them for their participation in making these things come about. The truth is, this was not an initiative that was brought forth by the police department. It was brought forth by the community. And then the community, the police department said, okay, we see the benefit of it as well, and started to study it. So I just want to make sure I do what I feel like is right, and shouting out to those individuals in the community who bring these issues to us. In particular, it was CU Citizens for Peace and Justice. So I just wanted to make sure that was part of the public record.
Okay, all right. And I want to admit a wrong that I have done. I failed to ask Gail Redding to come forward at the time of the discussion for number 9, which would be the ordinance approving the annexation agreement. I'm sorry I didn't put her card in front of me to call her forth, and she's now left the building, so it's my mistake. Yeah, she could come again next week and perhaps get the attention.
We forgive
that
you,
she
Dennis.
wished
She
for.
could have said something compelling that would have changed some of these votes to, but.
You don't know, but it's possible. You can never tell. Okay, thank you very much. We're adjourned.